Last part, the death collector.
Sorry for the cliffhanger on the last entry, but it looked like it was going to be too long to finish in one post. Plus, I needed to take a break to move to a different room. The knocking was starting to get hard to ignore. The entry that came a page or two after the one bookmarked with Judy's prayer card looked way different than any of the ones before. Dear Journal, I understand that I am not at fault for what happened with Alex and Judy. I understand that these connections were only made out of extreme duress based on my guilt and psychotic beliefs following the death of first my father and then my nephew and sister-in-law. I know now that my death would not bring them back or cause any satisfaction to my brother Adam, who cares for me deeply despite his loss and has been a major part of my recovery, along with my mother. The black-eyed boy that I was seeing was a result of delusional thinking and hallucinations that have been properly diagnosed by Dr. Hawkins. After months of physical and mental recovery, I will be starting my journal afresh with a new mind after having it returned to me by the staff at St. Peter's Psychiatric Care Center and using the skills from my therapeutic journal to continue my recovery. The staff and Dr. Hawkins have my eternal gratitude for helping me start my life without delusion and begin my adulthood from a place of healing. After digging through the box the journals had been in, I found what looked like a workbook that I had overlooked, considering how identifiable the journals were. Inside were therapeutic exercises talking about guilt, shame, identifying how to distinguish hallucinations, countering delusional thoughts, what looked like unpolished versions of modern safety plans, entries he'd written during his treatment, and letters written back and forth between him, his mother, and his brother between visits. His brother offered him forgiveness and talked about not wanting to lose anyone else he loved. His mother talked about how strong she knew he was. Although I knew that psychiatric treatment had been far less humane in the past, the workbook was honestly inspiring, even heartwarming, at least if I didn't know where the story ended. If I didn't know there were more journals to read. Still, there were over a decade of pretty standard entries that seemed much more monumental considering the ones I'd read up until now. His brother remarried and had 2 children, one named after his father with the middle name of the son he lost, and the other with their daughter with Judy's name as her middle name. I couldn't help but wonder what the new wife thought of the latter, but considering the intensity of his loss, maybe she was understanding. Either way, there weren't any entries that were negative about it. Blitz passed away as an old man, and eventually he got his own dog named Duke that he took with him when he started his own family. Alan got a steady job as a butcher at a store he'd frequented growing up and eventually became the manager. He married, had kids that his mother often watched for them on date nights and seemed to dote on. Knowing how things were with his kids now, it was strange to see how much he wrote about them, how Alicia was so smart that it caused her trouble, how the middle daughter was already so kind, how he was so happy to have a baby boy to round out their family. It made the punch in the gut even worse when the streak broke. Dear Journal, I finally remembered. It's been so long and my treatment was so intense that I really did think I was crazy. That Christian was just something that flared up when I got too stressed, like when Dad died, or when everything happened with Alex and Judy. Some kid based on the imaginary friend I made up when Adam was getting too old to bring his little brother around. So I'd let it out of my mind for all these years. But they came tonight. It was late, maybe 10 p.m., and Rosie and the kids were all asleep. I just finished looking for Jupiter since it was a clear night. Then someone knocked on the door while I was putting away the telescope. I was worried it was an emergency since it was so late, especially with the neighbor's heart attack last week, but I damn near had one myself when I saw who was there. There were 2 little girls at the door that looked just like Alicia and Maisie, down to Maisie's hair ribbons and the studs in Alicia's ears with her birthstone in them. I knew it couldn't be them, of course. They were upstairs in their beds. But it was uncanny. I asked them what was wrong, and they said that they woke up outside and that they were scared. They even called me Daddy. They were sniffling and whimpering in a way that broke my heart to hear, and I squatted down a second to get a better look, starting to wonder if maybe they'd been sleepwalking even if that hadn't happened before. Then I saw their eyes, completely black, even what should have been the whites of their eyes, and I remembered. I slammed the door shut, and they started clawing and banging the door behind me, sobbing, letting out these keening cries for Daddy to let them in, and that I was scaring them. They were scaring me. I locked the door and ran upstairs to the girls' room while Rosie was coming out to see what was happening, and there they were. My little girls sat up in bed with that same scared, confused look as the girls on the doorstep. They were mine, though. Their eyes were teary, but they were the same eyes that had looked at me from their little bundles at the hospital the day they were born. Rosie was so worried. She kept asking why the door slammed and what all the banging was, and I told her that it was some hitchhiker wanting a ride that gave me a bad feeling. She didn't seem like she believed me, but since she didn't have a better option, she let it go. I'm on the couch writing this to make sure they don't come back, and I hope I'm just overtired. I hope to God I'm just tired, because if not, I've got no one to turn to for this. It looked like things settled down for a while again, almost long enough that he had dismissed the incident before the girls showed up again. Dear Journal, Rosie answered the door after dinner, and as I went to go into the living room, I saw who she was talking to. It was the girls again. Rosie seemed so confused and even looked back to make sure the girls were still playing on the floor near the couch, especially after I heard them beg Mommy to let them in and that they were sorry for going out without asking. I didn't hear anymore because I ran up behind her and slammed the door in their faces, the older girl barely pulling her hand off the door frame in time. Rosie got upset with me and started shouting at me for being heartless, that clearly these two little girls were confused, and I lost it. I shouted back for her to bring the girls upstairs, and that those demons were not coming into our house, that it'd be over my dead body. Our girls had never heard us fight before. Hell, we never had fought until now. And they ran upstairs like they'd seen the devil himself, and he was biting at their heels. I don't know what got into Rosie, but she was actually fighting me to get at the door. It was like something had come over her, and she was dead set on getting that door open, only made worse by those little demons crying and begging for their mother. I felt like I was going crazy, like my entire world was crashing down on me. The only thing that made me keep going and kept her away from the door is knowing what those things could do to us, to our children. And then it just stopped. The banging and the crying was gone. Rosie was staring at me from about a foot away, looking concerned, and I had my back against the door. The only thing that let me know I hadn't completely lost my mind was the scratches up and down my arms from her nails. She started asking me what was wrong, acting like those scratches were from some cat or from Duke jumping on me, and genuinely seemed like she had no idea what had happened just a few seconds before. I told her that she had come at me over those girls at the door, and I asked her if she lost her mind, but she really didn't know what I was talking about. The only thing that helped was when I went upstairs, the girls ran to me crying and asking me why Mommy and Daddy were fighting and if something bad happened. I held them for a long time, kept pulling away to look at their eyes and kiss them on their foreheads, kept telling them that Daddy loves them and that everything would be okay. I was lying to them. I don't know if anything will be okay. After this, there were entries about trying to act like everything was normal and about the nightmares he started having. Nightmares about his own little girls turning into the ones with the black eyes and shooting him in his sleep, choking the baby in his sleep, opening his wife's belly with a knife the way Alex had been shot. There were so many desperate attempts for him to separate those nightmares from his girls, and how he was worried that it was affecting how he interacted with his kids. How eventually he even started having nightmares of his baby boy opening his eyes after a nap and them being all black. Dear Journal, I think it might have gotten past the point of no return. Today the girls were playing outside with Charlie now that he's big enough to run around with them, with either Rosie or I looking out to check on them every few minutes. I was worried about those demons popping up somewhere the way they had when I was young, and Rosie was just being a good mom like she always was. I think she was actually asking me about whether I'd come up tonight instead of sleeping downstairs, and I was making up something else about my back being better on the stiffer couch. When I noticed I didn't see the kids anymore, I asked her if we could talk about it after I saw where they went off to and headed out to find them. It took a bit longer than I expected, but eventually I found them heading back towards the house, each of them holding Charlie's hand as he giggled and let them lift him up between them. It was one of the things they did as siblings that made me feel at ease whenever the nightmares made me worry, and then they looked up. It was them. I felt my knees go weak as they kept playing with my little boy, acting as if nothing was wrong, and smiling at me with the same shark-like smiles that I remembered from so long ago. This was the first time I've been near them without the door there to protect me, and I felt vulnerable, especially since they had my son. They greeted me in my daughter's voices and asked if they can bring Charlie back in and get some lemonade before they came back outside. I just kept shaking my head and thinking how this couldn't be happening, wondering where my real daughters were, when there were suddenly big bright bursts of laughter from somewhere behind me, and my girls came running from the bushes, not too far from the back door. They kept giggling at their prank and saying how their new friends wanted to help them play a trick on me and Mommy and see if we would notice before they came inside. They took their brother's hands and asked me if they spooked me good before seeing my face. I must have looked bad because they immediately got upset and started apologizing for the prank and blaming the demons for coming up with it. And I knew they had wanted to get inside and that they would have done something to hurt my family, maybe even replaced my girls. The idea had been ruminating in my nightmares, but it hadn't come to a head until that moment when the demons feigned fear at getting in trouble and ran off. I don't think I can do this anymore. Either those things are going to hurt my family, or I'm going to end up doing it myself. The entries after this were too sad to go into much detail here. The fear of his children and how he lashed out at them and their mother in return, maybe even on purpose to make them leave him. how messy the divorce was, even when he tried to let them take whatever they needed, because she had tried to take Duke from him too. The empty home after she'd won, trying to tell his brother and mother what had happened, fighting them tooth and nail to keep them from having him committed, something they legally couldn't do but were trying their hardest to do anyway. The years of fear, pain, and loneliness that followed as the people he loved became more and more distant, and the black-eyed children became more and more frequent. And I knew from the last journal, and the fact I was here to begin with, where that had ended. I was torn about whether I should try to at least give his children the letter from the first journal I found, regardless of keeping the rest of the journals from them, to remove the full context. Maybe it would give them the closure they needed, even if they didn't 100% understand what he'd meant. Then I heard a giggle. My head jerked up to the window, but, as expected from the second floor, there was nothing there. Still, it was the wake-up call I needed to finish my job. I put the journals aside and stacked them in order to take home with me, and went to work with the usual business of dealing with the dead. Every once in a while, I thought I heard a giggle again, but I ignored it. Still, I ended up having to come back the next day to finish the job, with the giggling still seeming to follow me from room to room. When the house was empty, I was doing my last check of all the rooms, when another giggle caught my attention, closer than before. I was in the living room, so I looked out of one of the windows and saw him, a boy with black eyes and a shark-like grin. For some reason, I wasn't scared. I was furious. I had something in my hand at the time, a poetry book I'd missed or something, and I threw it at the window as hard as I could. The soft-covered book made a loud slapping sound as it hit the glass and actually made the kid jump. He looked me in the eyes almost accusingly before moving away from the window, and when I grabbed the book, he was gone. I left, not long after. Although I did offer, Alicia refused to see the letter and actually got aggressive with me when I asked if I could offer it to her siblings, but luckily it was after payment had exchanged hands. Still, I kind of wish she'd seen it. I know how hard things must have been for her and her siblings, judging by what I had glimpsed in those journals, but I couldn't help but feel bad that Alan's only apology wouldn't reach who it needed to. Of course, right on cue. No idea how they end up coordinating the knocking so that it's in so many places at once, and I'm not sure if the boy from the house or one of the other ones that come around, but it's about the time of year they start trying to get in. Hopefully, I still have a bag of assorted candy in the cabinet I can leave out after they go away for the night. In the meantime, I look forward to answering your questions and seeing the names you give me, even if it riles things up off schedule here. Thanks for tuning in to Roundup Reddit. Until next time, keep exploring the hidden stories around you.